It was a breezy afternoon, and Olivia walked slowly down the sidewalk with her guide dog, Shadow. Olivia was in her 30s, with dark hair tied neatly in a ponytail and a gentle smile on her face. She moved carefully, listening to the sounds around her. To most people, she seemed quiet and harmless. She was blind and depended on her dog to help her get around. People often thought she needed help with everything. But what they didn't know was that Olivia was stronger than she looked, and Shadow was no ordinary dog. Shadow walked beside Olivia, his tail wagging gently. He was a large, black dog with bright, intelligent eyes. He was more than just a helper, he was a protector. But most people didn't see that. They only saw a blind woman and her dog, nothing more. As Olivia and Shadow made their way to the park, the streets were busy. Cars zoomed by, people chatted on their phones, and children laughed as they played. Olivia could hear the crunch of leaves under her feet and the rustling of trees in the gentle wind. It was a peaceful day, and Olivia enjoyed these walks. They gave her a sense of freedom, a chance to feel the world in her own way. Shadow led her confidently, stopping at curbs and guiding her around obstacles. But today was different. A loud rumbling noise filled the air. Olivia could feel the vibration through the sidewalk. It was a group of bikers. They rode down the street, their engines roaring like thunder. Olivia knew they were getting closer. Shadow's ears perked up, and he tensed slightly. Olivia felt it through the leash and patted him gently. "It's okay, boy," she whispered. The bikers zoomed past, laughing and shouting. They were young and wild, wearing leather jackets and dark sunglasses. They thought they owned the road. As they passed Olivia, one of them slowed down and yelled, "Hey, lady! Better hold on to that dog before he walks you into traffic." The other bikers laughed loudly, their voices echoing in the air. Olivia's grip on Shadow's leash tightened slightly, but she stayed calm. She had heard people say mean things before, and she had learned to ignore them. But this time, she decided to respond. She turned her head slightly in the direction of the biker's voice and said in a calm, steady voice, "Don't worry. Shadow knows exactly where he's going." The biker didn't respond right away. Maybe he was surprised that Olivia answered back. Or maybe he was waiting for his friends to laugh again. After a moment, they roared off, their bikes disappearing down the road. Olivia stood still for a second, listening to the fading sound of their engines. She could feel Shadow standing tall beside her, strong and steady. Little did those bikers know, Shadow was not just any dog. He had a past that could surprise anyone. Before he became Olivia's guide dog, he had a very important job. Shadow used to be a canine dog, a trained hero who once saved an entire village during a dangerous flood. He had led people to safety, sniffed out danger, and even helped rescue trapped families. Shadow had been through more danger than those bikers could ever imagine. But now, he had a different job. He was Olivia's guide and best friend. As Olivia and Shadow continued their walk, she couldn't help but think about how people often judged her. They saw her blindness and thought she was weak. They saw Shadow and thought he was just a pet. But Olivia knew the truth. She was stronger than people believed, and Shadow was more than just a helper, he was a protector, a friend, and a hero in disguise. Walking further down the sidewalk, Olivia could still feel the slight rush of frustration in her chest. She hated when people underestimated her. It had happened many times before. In grocery stores, at bus stops, and even at her own workplace, people assumed she couldn't do much on her own. But Olivia had learned to stay strong, just like Shadow. She had learned to prove them wrong in her own quiet way. As they reached the park, Olivia let out a deep breath and smiled. The park was one of her favorite places. It was always full of live children playing, joggers running past, and birds singing in the trees. Olivia loved to sit on her favorite bench, feel the warm sun on her face, and listen to the world around her. She walked over to the bench and sat down, letting Shadow rest beside her. She reached down and gently scratched behind his ears. "You're my hero, you know that," she said softly. Shadow wagged his tail, leaning against her leg. People walked past Olivia, some smiling kindly, others barely noticing her. She wondered what they would think if they knew Shadow's story. Would they still see her as weak? Would they still think Shadow was just a pet? Probably not. A little girl nearby pointed at Shadow and asked her mom, "Mommy, can I pet the doggy?" Her mother smiled and shook her head. "Not this one, sweetie. He's working." Olivia smiled at the woman's understanding. "It's okay," she said. "Shadow likes kids." The little girl carefully reached out and petted Shadow's back. "He's soft," she giggled. "What's his name?" "Shadow," Olivia replied. "He's my guide dog." The girl looked curious. "Does he help you because you can't see?" "Yes," Olivia said kindly. "He helps me find my way and keeps me safe." The little girl smiled and whispered, "He's a good dog." "Yes, he is," Olivia agreed, running her hand over Shadow's fur. "He's the best dog." As the little girl walked away with her mother, Olivia leaned back on the bench. She listened to the sounds of the park, feeling peaceful again. The biker's rude words were already forgotten. She knew the truth: she was not weak, and Shadow was not ordinary. They made a great team, and nothing could change that. A gentle breeze blew through the park, rustling the leaves above her. Olivia took a deep breath and smiled. She knew that no matter what people thought, she and Shadow were unstoppable. And if those bikers ever crossed paths with them again, they might just learn that lesson the hard way. It was a calm afternoon, and Olivia walked with Shadow down the sidewalk, feeling the familiar cool breeze on her face. But something felt different today. The group of bikers who had teased her earlier weren't gone yet. Olivia could sense them nearby, their loud engines rumbling in the distance. Shadow walked close beside her, his body tense and alert. He could feel it too. Suddenly, one of the bikers, a tall man with a leather jacket and a rough voice, circled back toward Olivia. His name was Jake, and he had a reputation for being a bully. Olivia could hear the heavy sound of his motorcycle as he slowed down beside her. The loud engine hummed, and then she heard his voice. "Nice dog," Jake sneered. His voice was full of mockery, and Olivia could tell he was trying to make fun of her. "Bet he's useless in a real fight." Olivia didn't say anything at first. She kept walking, holding onto Shadow's leash firmly. She had heard comments like this before. People often assumed she was weak because she was blind. But Olivia knew better. And so did Shadow. Before Olivia could respond, Shadow let out a low, quiet growl. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make Jake pause for a second. Olivia could feel Shadow's muscles tighten beneath his thick fur. He was ready to protect her if needed. Jake, however, didn't seem to care. He just laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the empty sidewalk. "What's a blind woman gonna do anyway?" Jake taunted. "Maybe teach your mutt some manners." His words stung, but Olivia kept her face calm. She didn't want to let him know that his words hurt. Instead, she stopped walking and turned her head slightly in his direction. "Shadow knows exactly what to do," she said calmly. Jake revved his motorcycle loudly, making a few people turn to look. His friends, who were waiting down the street, laughed and cheered him on. They were enjoying the scene, thinking it was funny to pick on Olivia. Jake smirked, feeling proud of himself, and then he sped off down the road to join the others. Olivia took a deep breath, feeling the tension in her chest. She knelt down beside Shadow and stroked his fur gently. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, her voice soft but firm. "We don't let people like him get to us." Shadow's ears perked up as he listened to her words. His deep brown eyes focused on her face, as if he understood every word she was saying. And maybe he did. After all, Shadow wasn't just any dog. He had a past that most people didn't know about. Before he became Olivia's guide, Shadow had been a canine rescue dog. He had once saved an entire village during a disaster. He had led families to safety, found missing people, and even protected his team from danger. Shadow wasn't just smart, he was a hero. Olivia knew Shadow could handle himself. He wasn't scared of loud noises, bullies, or trouble. But that didn't mean she liked it when people like Jake treated them badly. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't right. Olivia stood up and held onto Shadow's leash tightly. "Come on, Shadow. Let's keep going," she said. They continued walking, ignoring the fading sound of the bikers in the distance. As they made their way through the park, Olivia could feel Shadow still on high alert. He was always watching, always listening. She trusted him completely. Olivia had learned a long time ago that Shadow could sense danger before she could. He could hear things she couldn't, smell things she didn't even know were there. That's why she knew she was safe with him. But Olivia also knew that Jake and his friends weren't done yet. Bullies like them never gave up so easily. They loved to pick on people they thought were weak. And Olivia knew they thought she was weak because she couldn't see. But what they didn't know was that she had a strength that didn't come from sight. It came from inside her. And with Shadow by her side, she was even stronger. A few minutes later, Olivia heard the familiar rumble of Jake's motorcycle again. Her grip on Shadow's leash tightened slightly. She could tell they were getting closer. Shadow's ears twitched, and he let out a quiet huff. He was ready, always ready. Jake and his friends pulled up beside her again, this time blocking her path. "Hey lady," Jake called out, his voice full of mischief. "You sure you're okay out here all alone?" Olivia sighed but kept her voice steady. "I'm not alone," she said simply, patting Shadow's head. "I've got my friend with me." Jake laughed, and one of his friends joined in. Yeah. Your little dog there. What's he gonna do? Bark at us?" Olivia didn't answer. Instead, she knelt down and whispered into Shadow's ear again. This time, her voice was firm but calm. "Stay ready, Shadow," she said softly. Shadow's ears perked up, and he stood taller, his eyes locked on the bikers. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. But his body language said enough. He was watching them closely, waiting for any sign of trouble. And Jake? He was starting to feel uncomfortable. Something about the way Shadow looked at him made Jake pause. It was like the dog could see right through him. "Let's get outta here," one of Jake's friends muttered. "This dog gives me the creeps." Jake hesitated, but he didn't want to look weak in front of his friends. He pointed at Olivia and smirked. "You better keep that mutt close, lady," he said before revving his engine again. "You never know when you might need him." Olivia didn't respond. She just held Shadow's leash tightly and waited until the sound of their bikes faded away. Once they were gone, she let out a small sigh of relief and smiled down at Shadow. "Good boy," she said softly. "You always know what to do." Shadow wagged his tail slightly, happy to hear her voice. Olivia knew that no matter what happened, she could always count on him. Jake and his gang thought they were tough, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. Shadow had been through worse, and he had come out stronger. And as for Olivia, she wasn't afraid. She never was. Because with Shadow by her side, she was unstoppable. The next day, Olivia and Shadow returned to the park. It was a sunny afternoon, and the air felt fresh. Olivia loved coming to the park because it made her feel calm and happy. The sound of children playing, birds chirping, and the rustling leaves helped her relax. Shadow walked beside her, his leash firm in her hand, guiding her safely along the path. But Olivia had a feeling that something was different today. She could sense it. The quiet moments of peace were soon interrupted by the loud roar of motorcycles. The familiar sound made her heart race just a little. She knew exactly who it was. The bikers were back. As the engines grew louder, Shadow's ears perked up. His body tensed, and Olivia could feel his muscles tighten under her grip. She gently patted his head, whispering, "Easy, boy. Stay calm." But inside, Olivia knew trouble was coming. The bikers stopped near the fountain where Olivia often sat. They weren't just passing by this time. They had come looking for her. Olivia heard the crunch of their boots on the gravel as they walked closer. They surrounded her, their voices filled with laughter and mockery. "Hey, look who's back," Jake sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Out for another walk with your little pet?" His friends chuckled, blocking her path so she couldn't move forward. Olivia stood still, holding Shadow's leash tightly. She could feel the tension in the air, but she didn't let it show on her face. Shadow, however, was not as quiet. He stood in front of Olivia, his body straight and firm. His sharp eyes locked onto the bikers, watching their every move. "You think that Mutt's gonna protect you?" Jake taunted, stepping closer. "He's just a pet." Shadow didn't move, but his deep brown eyes stayed on Jake. Olivia didn't say a word. She knew Shadow could sense danger better than anyone. And right now, Shadow knew that these men weren't here to be friendly. Suddenly, Shadow let out a loud, sharp bark. It wasn't just any bark, it was strong and commanding. The sound echoed across the park, and for a brief moment, everything went silent. One of the bikers, a tall guy with a scar on his cheek, jumped back in surprise. Jake tried to laugh it off. "Relax, it's just a dog," he muttered, but Olivia could hear something different in his voice now. He wasn't as confident as before. Shadow's stance was unwavering. His ears were forward, his tail stiff, and his eyes never left Jake. He growled low and deep, a warning that no one could ignore. The scar-faced biker gulped and took another step back. "Hey, Jake, maybe we should leave," he whispered. But Jake wasn't ready to back down. "It's just a dumb dog," he said again, but his bravado was starting to fade. There was something about Shadow, something in his eyes that made Jake uneasy. It wasn't fear, but something else. Strength. Experience. As if Shadow had seen much worse than a gang of bikers. Olivia stood calmly, feeling Shadow's strength beside her. "You don't know who you're dealing with," she said softly. Jake smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. He was trying to act tough, but deep down, he was unsure. "Oh yeah," he scoffed. "What's so special about him?" Olivia ran her fingers gently through Shadow's fur. "Shadow isn't just a pet," she said. "He's saved lives. He's been in places you wouldn't survive for a minute." The bikers exchanged nervous glances. Jake still looked skeptical, but Olivia could hear the doubt creeping into his voice. "Saved lives? What, like barking at mailmen?" he joked, but his laugh was forced. Olivia smiled a little. "Shadow used to be a canine rescue dog," she said. "He worked in disaster zones. He's led people out of danger, found those who were lost, and stood in front of real threats." Her voice was calm but strong. "He's trained to protect, and he's not afraid of you." Jake's smirk disappeared. He looked at Shadow again, this time with a little more respect. The other bikers shifted uncomfortably. The scar-faced one mumbled, "Maybe we shouldn't mess with her, man." Shadow's growl grew louder, his body inching closer, warning them not to take another step. Olivia could feel the bikers' hesitation. They weren't so sure anymore. Then, a police car drove slowly past the park. One of the bikers noticed and nudged Jake. "Come in, man. Let's get out of here before we get into trouble." Jake hesitated, looking from Olivia to Shadow. He didn't want to admit defeat, but he also didn't want to test the dog standing in front of him. "Whatever," he muttered, stepping back. "Let's go." One by one, the bikers turned and walked away, their footsteps fading. Jake lingered for a moment longer, glaring at Olivia. "You got lucky today," he said. Olivia didn't reply. She just stood there, a small smile on her face, holding onto Shadow's leash with confidence. Jake finally turned and joined his friends, revving his motorcycle before speeding away. When they were gone, Olivia knelt down beside Shadow. "Good boy," she whispered, scratching behind his ears. "You did great." Shadow wagged his tail, his body finally relaxing. Olivia felt a wave of relief wash over her. She knew the bikers might come back another day, but for now, she and Shadow had won this round. People in the park who had watched the scene unfold gave Olivia small smiles of encouragement. A few children even clapped quietly. Olivia stood up, feeling proud and strong. As she walked away with Shadow by her side, she thought about how often people underestimated her. They saw a blind woman with a dog and thought she needed help. They thought she was weak. But Olivia knew the truth. She was strong, and Shadow was more than just a dog. He was her protector, her friend, and her hero. And if Jake and his friends ever tried to mess with them again, they would be ready. Jake smirked as he walked closer to Olivia. He thought she was weak, helpless even. His friends stood behind him, waiting to see what he would do next. Olivia stood still, holding Shadow's leash tightly, feeling his strength beside her. Shadow didn't move, but Olivia could feel the tension in his body. He was ready. Jake reached out, his hand moving toward Olivia's cane. "Let's see if you can walk without this," he said with a sneer. Before Jake's fingers could touch it, Shadow sprang into action. In one swift motion, Shadow leaped forward, knocking Jake off balance. Jake's arms flailed as he stumbled backward, landing hard on the ground with a thud. The other bikers gasped, their laughter dying in their throats. Shadow stood in front of Olivia, his stance strong and protective. His bark rang through the park, loud and commanding. People turned to look. Parents pulled their children closer. The bikers, who had been so confident a moment ago, now looked unsure. Jake scrambled to his feet, his face red with anger and embarrassment. "What the heck?" he sputtered, brushing dirt off his jacket. Olivia's voice cut through the air, calm but firm. "Enough," she said. There was no fear in her voice, only quiet strength. She took a step forward, standing tall, and her hand rested gently on Shadow's back. "Shadow isn't just any dog," she continued. "He's saved lives, more lives than you can count. And if you think you can intimidate us, think again." The bikers stood frozen, staring at Olivia and Shadow. The confidence they had earlier was gone. There was something in Olivia's voice that made them pause. And Shadow, standing so still and strong, looked like he belonged to something bigger, something they didn't understand. One of the bikers, a skinny guy with a bandana, whispered, "Did you see how fast that dog moved?" Another biker, the one with the scar on his cheek, gulped and muttered, "I think we should go, Jake." Jake looked around, his bravado fading fast. He wanted to say something smart, something to save face, but he couldn't. His heart was pounding in his chest, and for the first time, he felt nervous. He glanced at Shadow, whose eyes were locked on him, steady and unwavering. Jake knew this wasn't just an ordinary dog. I didn't mean nothing by it," Jake mumbled, stepping back. Olivia tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "You meant to scare me," she said. "But you should know by now, I'm not scared. And neither is Shadow." Jake rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. He looked over his shoulder at his friends, who were already inching away, not wanting any more trouble. "Let's get out of here," he muttered, turning quickly and walking toward his bike. The other bikers didn't need to be told twice. They followed Jake, their earlier confidence completely gone. As they got onto their bikes, they glanced back at Olivia and Shadow one last time. There was no laughter now, no teasing. Just silence. As the roar of their motorcycles faded into the distance, Olivia sighed and reached down to pat Shadow's head. "Good boy," she whispered with a small smile. People in the park, who had been watching from a distance, started clapping softly. A few parents nodded at Olivia with respect, and some kids whispered in awe about the brave dog that protected his owner. A man who had been sitting on a nearby bench walked over and said, that was amazing. Your dog is really something special. Olivia smiled. He is, she said. Shadow's more than just a guide dog. He's my protector, my friend, my hero. Shadow wagged his tail slightly, sensing that the danger was gone. Olivia could feel the tension leaving his body, but she knew he would always be ready, just in case. As Olivia walked away from the fountain, she couldn't help but think about how often people underestimated her. They thought being blind made her weak. They thought Shadow was just a pet. But today, they learned the truth. Olivia wasn't weak, and Shadow wasn't just any dog. As they continued their walk, Olivia felt a newfound sense of strength. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone, but it felt good knowing that she and Shadow had stood their ground. She knew there would always be people like Jake, people who judged without knowing, people who thought they could push others around. But she also knew that with Shadow by her side, she was never truly alone. A little girl ran up to Olivia and said shyly, "Your dog is a hero." Olivia knelt down, smiling. "He sure is," she said. "But you know what? Sometimes heroes come in small packages too." The girl beamed and ran back to her mother. Olivia stood up, adjusting her sunglasses and holding Shadow's leash firmly. They walked on, the sun shining down on them, and Olivia knew that no matter what challenges came their way, she and Shadow could face them together. And somewhere, far away, Jake and his friends were still thinking about the day they messed with the wrong woman and the wrong dog. As the roar of the motorcycles faded into the distance, Olivia let out a small sigh of relief. The park felt quiet again. For a moment, everything was still. Then, a soft clap broke the silence. Soon, more people joined in, and before Olivia knew it, there was a small crowd applauding. Some people had seen everything happen. Others had only heard bits and pieces, but they all knew one thing: Shadow was no ordinary dog, and Olivia was no ordinary woman. A little boy ran up, tugging on his mother's hand. "Mommy, that dog is a hero," he said excitedly. His mother smiled and nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, he sure is." Olivia felt her cheeks warm up a little, but she simply smiled and knelt down beside Shadow. "Good job, boy," she whispered, rubbing his ears gently. Shadow wagged his tail, his eyes bright and alert. He stood tall, proud but calm, as if nothing had happened at all. Just then, Olivia heard footsteps approaching. A deep but friendly voice spoke. "You and Shadow are quite the team," the voice said. Olivia turned her head slightly and smiled. It was Officer Daniels, a local police officer she had met a few times before. He had seen Shadow at work during community events and always admired him. Word spreading fast about what happened here, the officer continued. "I heard Shadow handled those bikers like a real pro." Olivia stood up, holding Shadow's leash confidently. "He's more than a guide," she said, patting his back. "He's my partner. And together, we don't back down." Officer Daniels chuckled and nodded. "I can see that," he said. "Those bikers won't be bothering anyone again, not after what happened today." Olivia smiled softly. "I hope they learned their lesson." The officer leaned in a little closer. "You know, Olivia, not many people would have stayed so calm in a situation like that. You handled it really well." Olivia shrugged. "I've had a lot of practice," she said. "People underestimate me all the time. But I've learned that strength doesn't come from what you see. It comes from what you know you can do." Officer Daniels nodded thoughtfully. "That's a good way to put it." He reached down and gave Shadow a gentle pat. "And this guy here? He's the best partner you could ask for." Shadow wagged his tail again, sensing the kindness in the officer's voice. As the crowd slowly began to disperse, a few people came up to Olivia to thank her for standing up to the bikers. One elderly man smiled warmly and said, "It's about time someone put those troublemakers in their place." A young woman added, "I walk my dog here all the time, and they've always scared me. But not anymore, thanks to you." Olivia simply nodded, feeling grateful for their kind words. She didn't think of herself as a hero. She just did what she had to do. But knowing that others felt safer because of her and Shadow made her heart swell with pride. Just as she was about to leave, Olivia heard a familiar voice. Miss Olivia. She turned slightly toward the sound and recognized Mr. Jenkins, the friendly owner of the nearby coffee shop. Hi, Mr. Jenkins, she said with a smile. I saw what happened, he said. You and Shadow were amazing. You know, I always tell my customers about your bravery, but today you proved it even more. Olivia chuckled. Thank you,